Welcome to the Consumer Code Show, where we believe that humans are incredible and we are living in a first era in history where behavioral data and AI have hit scale so we can go from consumer insight to business activation in no time. In this show, we explore the world of retail through the lens of demography, cartography, ethnography, and the economy. So without further ado, let's get into this episode. Okay, welcome everybody to the show today. I'm joined by a true original today in the world of retail analytics, Jack Thompson. So Jack Thompson is the former CEO of Tango Analytics, a company that he built from the ground up successfully and then exited in 2015. Before that, he led real estate strategy for brands that you would know like McDonald's, Boston Market, Taco Bell. And he worked behind the scenes on everything from neural networks in their early stages to trade area models and even to construction strategy. And he has helped some of the biggest name brands also solve the retail site selection puzzle. So it's somebody that has lived in the intersection of economics, technology, and real estate. And I am thrilled to have you, Jack, on the show today.
Thank you very much. It makes you feel old.
Well, I mean, let's go back to the beginning. So I think you have a unique situation where your stepfather was actually a developer and you were actually on track to follow his footsteps until your life took a turn. So what did you learn growing up in the back seat of that car that helped you understand shopping centers in a different way?
Well, my mom had a business, a personnel agency, and we ended up joining her sales and marketing expertise from her team with architects and engineers and construction project managers and that team. And it was really that integration of two companies when I was like 22 years old was really special and magic in a bottle. But what I really, as I was thinking back in anticipation of today's call, what I really remembered, it kind of dawned on me that during the week, I would build the shopping centers that were family properties. I would build the apartments that were family, owned properties. And then on the weekends, I would sell the houses that were in our single family developments with 18% interest back then. But if you think about it, okay, knowing where the shopping centers are and knowing what feeds the shopping centers in terms of the population really gave me a fundamental foundation in what makes that whole ecosystem work without me even realizing what was going on at the time.
So you kind of got a picture of the consumer set that was around the shopping center, but also the shopping center itself and how that worked.
And we would have to decide whether or not we should be building, he was a developer, right? He'd look at a piece of land, just like a site selection guy would be doing, or woman would be doing, in looking at a piece of dirt for a new restaurant. Okay, it's a blank pad site. So it gave me a lot of understanding of that ecosystem, kind of from a DNA perspective, without even osmosis, without me even realizing it per se.
But you didn't eventually follow the path of a developer. You moved into this analytics space. What brought you there?
Well, my stepfather unfortunately passed away in '89. By that point, I had built condos in Florida. I'd gotten my construction contractor's license. I was licensed to build everything except the high rise in Florida, real estate license in Florida. I went to, we owned a marina in New Jersey, right in the Philadelphia area. I went up to, clean troublemakers that were running it out of that business and turn around that business. I got because I was the owner's kid, I got paid the least and did the most and had the hairiest projects, and that came to be also part of my DNA as I came into management consulting, and especially at Tango when we started building predictive analytics models, we would always get the hard cases. FedEx, coming to us and saying, hey, it turns out everybody's got a printer in their house these days. Okay, so how do we optimize for shipping? Or Concentra Healthcare, hey, we want to switch from just purely Ahmed and, hanging out in industrial parks and be off the industrial park on the highway with urgent care as well. with high signage and everything, still accessible. So I would get the tricky problems, which kind of again goes back to my getting the hard cases when I was a kid.
But then you get into this analytics part, like were you good at math? Because eventually you went to college for that.
Well, I went to my undergrad was in econ and business administration, and very much loved econ. And Art was a big see the future kind of guy, and he would pass judging on my classes like this. Pay attention to this one. This one's crap. Stuff.
Wait, who's Art?
My stepfather.
Okay.
Yeah, so when I was in college, he would pass. I'd come home with my
Okay.
book, and he'd just, like throw this away. Pay attention to this one. But econ was always, because he could literally see the future, and that's what I wanted to do, is be able to see the future. And one of the things he told me is foresight and initiative. And if you think about those two words, foresight, seeing the future, and initiative, speed, better decisions faster. Okay, and that's really what the ethos of everything that I ended up doing in my career. So I went to grad school at Northwestern, and then got out and got a job at Taco Bell in site selection, and that's when they were owned by Pepsi, and Taco Bell was at the time really top of the game. They were on the cover of Harvard Business Review for creating the 59.79.99 value meal. And we had David Gibbs, who's the CEO of Yum Brands right now. He and I started in the same cohort of MBAs that started during like 89, 90 timeframe. And they had they had just come out, Windows 3.1 had just come out, and they had this super cool site package that was very slimmed down. Okay, most site packages were, big legal file folders. And when we submitted a site, we used this application that was an integrated Word document. It had legal scoring, okay, but like clauses would be scored, very ahead of its time. And then it would have pro forma that was, but there was no sales forecasting per se. So that what happened is I'd get in a car, I'd have a proposed site. And for instance, we'd get in the car with the VP of operations for the region and my boss, VP of real estate. And the VP of real estate wanted a higher sales forecast. Again, it was all putting your thumb in the air kind of stuff. And they had to beat each other over the head to get to agreement, which was an inefficient process. The operations guy wanted to shoot low because he had to live with the budget. Okay. And God forbid I brought a site that didn't have a McDonald's in the trade area. I got my ass handed to me because, like, what do you mean you're bringing us a Taco Bell location and there's no McDonald's in the trade area? I'd say, but sir, this is the location McDonald wish they would have if they knew about it. Just so, anyway.
Yes.
And then would submit those sites. And there was just some very basic demographic stuff. We have to call up corporate in Irvine, California, have somebody run a demographic report of 135-mile ring. Okay, nobody shops at rings, by the way, in case anybody told you that. But then I'd submit the site. We'd all submit the sites, and then delete the site would go into a file folder and somewhere in corporate, and it would be deleted off our laptops. And I was like, God, that's a terrible waste of data. Okay. So that stuck with me. A number of those things stuck with me. Then I was recruited out to Boston Market, Boston Chicken at the time. And they happened to have a demographics, a national decision system, which was, and eventually became Claritas. They were competitors at the time, but 6 CD jukebox of geodemographic data. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, cool. What's that thing? And I just started playing around with it, kind of like picking up an instrument. And I developed this, Boston Markets market planning algorithm where I exported data from the trade area, ran it through I had an Excel macro that ran it through and formatted it and stuck it in the file folder. And then I would take the attributes back and shade the polygons. By the way, the real estate guys, they insisted that management, because they were trained by some of the top people like Luigi Salvaneschi, who was at McDonald's, who went to Blockbuster, who, Scott, the CEO of Boston Market, friend of mine, was at Blockbuster. So they brought the training of, getting in the car, so we would fly in a helicopter, okay, and look at oil spots in parking lots.
Hmm.
We would have the real estate people draw on a Rand McNally map, okay, what each of the trade area polygons they think would be. Then my team would digitize them, and I would suck that data out. And so when the walls,
Okay, so wait a minute. You guys get this picture on a
Mhm.
Rand McNally map, and then you draw a polygon around it, and then your job is pulling the data out from it that you're doing from NDS, which eventually became Claritas.
so this is where the expert system stuff starts to creep in, because we insisted that the real estate guys who were in charge of a market, they would be the ones to submit their Rand McNally maps with the Sharpie marker trade area polygons on them. My team then took those Rand McNally maps and digitized the polygons
Yeah,
that they created. Okay,
yeah.
so
But how did you score it? Did you look at the demographic attributes within that polygon and just relate it to your best-selling stores?
I developed a Z-score model. I would put in things like cost for total rating point, okay, for advertising, and then back into how many stores would it take in this market to get media efficient.
Hmm.
Okay, that would then bring me back, and I could take it back and shade the
Yep.
counties rather. Okay, but I did it for the trade area model too, Z statistic as well. Okay, but you could take a whole map and say, of counties by the U.S., which is part of the roadshow materials, and say, look, here's the entire U.S. and here's the hot spots for our customers.
Sure.
And,
Okay.
and where we think the attractiveness is in
Yeah.
terms of these markets. Okay,
And
and
you're showing that to investors so that you can get
Wall
more
Street,
capital
Wall Street, yeah.
to open those. Yeah. But I want to make sure I understand that one piece. So the advertising piece, you said you need so many units to make an efficient media buy. What does that look like?
Well, so um, at a 5% contribution per store, at a national contribution. So every store, there's local media spend, but at a national, everybody gets 5% per store.
Yeah.
Okay, kick to the marketing kitty. Okay, and to get on TV in Chicago, how many stores to get, to run a flight? I work with the marketing department. Okay, and that's when I first got exposed to marketing flights.
Yeah.
Okay, and how those are created, and what the messaging is, and the rollout and everything. Okay, and so when I was at Taco Bell, we were open. We were the hottest thing because we were doing 285 stores a year, never been done. When I was at Boston Market, we got up to a store opening a day, which was like Wall Street just like went, what? You know,
Hmm.
and they, we'd have the Wall Street guys come in, and my shop with my team would be the first. I could hear the rustle of wool coming down the hall from the Wall Street guys. Okay. And Scott would bring them in, and it'd be a whole bookshelf of market plans. And he'd go like, where do you live? And I'm like, Connecticut. And he'd pull it down. And the front page would be this, trade area blotches with, where do you live? Right there. Oh, that's flaming ass red. That's and the next day the guy would have a store in his backyard. So
Yeah.
it was just a, really trippy kind of, getting their heads kind of thing. And we ended up ruthlessly using it to, honestly, to take the wind out of the capital raise sales of our competitor, Kenny Rogers Roaster. By the time, they were trying to raise capital as well, we were head to head, and Scott would bring them in, and they'd go back home and say to the Roasters guys, you're never going to make it against these guys.
Yeah. Jack, what you're saying, I think, is a nugget because there is a tension between marketing and real estate. And you would think all the research that real estate is done on a physical location would translate into marketing. And I think maybe at one point some of that happened, but it's increasingly not happening today. But the way that you kind of described it is you have a DMA, it's the Chicago DNA, and it cost money to run a flight of media there. And so you need some level of density of stores, or else you're wasting your money because you can't get to the Boston market.
I need 20, 50, let's say 10, 15 stores in Chicago open, contributing 5% to get on TV in Chicago. I need 30, 35 in LA. And by the way, that's hard work to get 35 open in LA fast. So in terms of a prioritization, that kind of dropped it down. You still focused on it. Okay, but you know, energies and everything, because you needed to get that presence. And the other thing, I think you brought up a good point. That was really the first time I was in charge of market research, like the marketing research. I mean, I was the first 85 people at Boston Chicken. Okay. And I was in charge of marketing research. Okay. And I did the studies that asked people, you know, if you hadn't come here, where would you have gone? And they would say pizza or Chinese. And I had this survey and I asked the focus groups and I said, well, what made you come to Boston Chicken? They go, healthier. I'm like, okay, the sodium and the butter and the corn, you know, the carbs and the stuffing, you know. Okay, but yeah, no, I was the marketing research department. So that kind of put me in a headspace, you know, alongside the real estate portion of it.
Yeah, I remember you talking a little bit about that expert system, and you kind of moved on to McDonald's, and you were talking about the tension that happens between operations and real estate as it relates to sales predictions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Starting at McDonald's, I developed a methodology to build. You know, I would get the typical geek showing a map to a crusty real estate guy, you know, young kid from corporate, you know, what do you know? You know, how many deals you done? You know, I got accelerated through the program. So, okay. But, you know, they would, you know, tell me immediately, oh, I know that site. You know, it's Mrs. McGillicuddy's. You know, I've been working at it. Okay. I said, look, it is not meant to take your job away or do your job better than you. You guys know your markets better. Okay. It's meant, and I came up with the phrase back at McDonald's because I was teaching Hamburger University by that point. Okay. So I was teaching people how to do this from around the world with headphones on and placards from different countries. Great sites fast, better decisions faster. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you can look at the map, get out in the road and do a deal that's approvable and no muss, no fuss, and everybody agrees with it. Isn't that what you want? You have a plan to make. You got to get 20 deals done this year. Don't you want that to be more efficient? Okay. And then to just diffuse and address the organizational behavior elephant in the room, I came up with this qualitative site scoring model methodology. So 18 questions. And instead of asking, you know, like Thompson and Associates would do, the square footage of signage or the number of curb cuts, you know, your wife doesn't shop based on the square footage of signage or the number of curb cuts. So we came up with 18 questions, a 5-point scale, qualitative, rate the accessibility, rate the ingress and egress, 1 to 5. You know, weight the degree of retail, 1 to 5. Rate the degree of office, 1 to 5. Entertainment, 1 to 5. You know, and think like a consumer. Okay. And then what I did is I trained all of the stakeholders, the operations and real estate people. We would all get in a van, simulate a site ride. Okay. I'll get in a van and with blank score sheets, and we'd drive around and would look at a particular existing location to gather the data that we could then use to model as to what makes a good location. So in other words, I'm taking you guys are the experts, You guys know what makes a good location for you. Okay, not me. Okay, so you all help train the data, okay, that I collect that will then analyze, and I'll call it out to you and say, look, but we've gathered, 110, like in case of McDonald's, 110 McDonald's locations in LA. Okay. We've gathered the site feature data. Okay. Analyzed it. We all agree that these are, and we're calibrated on what's a 3 or what's a 5 or what's a 1 or what's a 3 or, whatever. As long as they could get between 1 or 2, the way modeling works, that's good enough for who it's for. You get a bunch of data like that. Okay. Then you can analyze it and create a model that then goes forward and quick and dirty can score a piece of dirt. Okay, with an approved methodology. Now, you as the real estate guy will have to answer to the ops guy, and you'll have to concur, but you've all been trained on how to fill these surveys out. So if you tweak one from a 3 to a 2 or 3 to a 4 or whatever, okay, but that process beat the organizational behavior elephant, okay, and allowed them to see eye to eye on a structured approach that they all could see and believe it and knew how it got there. Because the black box thing, don't forget, was rampant back then. The way the businesses worked is I can tell you, but I'd have to kill you and you have to come back next year for an update. Okay. And from a management consulting perspective, that always made me bristle. So that expert system really was foundational and I took those guys from corporate out to LA and did the site ride thing for them. And it was like light bulbs went off in their head. Okay.
Yes.
And it became a standard approach to what really kicked over the predictability, prediction values of the models that we were building. And the same thing I did with demographics. So if we had a market plan, here's where we are, here's where we're not, here's where we want to be, and everybody agrees. And I had a set of 4 thematic maps that I did for McDonald's. The last one was a neighborhood screening model, which was block group, mushed up weighted variable shading. Okay. No, it wasn't income, but it had income in it. It wasn't population, but it had population. It wasn't day pop, but it had day pop in it. Okay. And it was a custom shaded neighborhood screening, which again was ahead of its time. So if we all agreed, this is where we are, this is where not where we should be. And then you have the site score, which 1 to 100, good dirt, bad dirt. Okay. Demographic screening, 1 to 100, good demos, bad demos. Okay. Then you could accelerate the process for decision-making, site approval. You could start spending money on soils, legal. Okay. You could get, rammed through the contract negotiations. Okay. And everybody was on board. Okay. Everybody agreed with the methodology and approach, and there was really no beating each other over the head anymore.
So that 18-point survey that you used, and you got everybody in the van, you brought them out, you had them score it. Did it actually end up improving the model?
Huge.
Really?
Profoundly huge. Absolutely profoundly huge. And really it smoothed the process, made a better prediction, and everybody was happy.
I want to just pause here and just recognize how profound what you did is in that. So you had basically 3 models that you're running with. Model number 1 is the predictive model. It's the one everybody knows. So you built a predictive model. It's probably usually multivariate regression. The second thing that you did is you leveraged the expertise of the people that were in the market, and you built that 18-point survey, which can we prove that it is useful? Yes, because you added it to the predictive model and things got more predictive, and simultaneously in one swoop, you stopped a huge organizational behavioral problem by getting the ops team and the retail predictive team on the same page. And then the third piece of this is you also use analog demographic models, so it's very easy to say, hey, this site looks very much like this site. And then you got everybody nodding your head. And then the key thing here is you were able to move deals faster.
And better decisions faster. Yes.
Yeah.
Better decisions faster, more agreement, uh, way less friction.
Hmm.
Okay. Way less meetings. My boss at McDonald's, her calendar would be stacked up with back to back to back. It's like Jamie Dimon was talking recently about his disdain for meetings, about meetings. That was another problem I ended up tackling. But yeah, it and it wasn't just multilinear. So if you look at a pyramid, and let's say there's a base of data. Okay. And then it goes up through an analytical tier, and then it comes up to, a predicted model and an analog model. Well, it wasn't just um, regression, because regression doesn't tell you anything about the future.
Hmm.
Okay. It's backward looking. And that's one of the things that, Rich Finker taught me at Tangram, which is true. Okay. It's got its uses. But there were log transformations. And then one of the things that Tango that we use is factor analysis, which is essentially a machine learning treeing kind of. Well, what kind of center is it? Is it this or is it that? If it's that, is it this, or is it that? Then it just, and you're clustering, you're factor clustering the stores. That helped us to analyze, far better than a regression would on the predictive side of the pyramid of models, let's say. Okay. That AI process and genetic algorithms, you know, uh, and fuzzy logic, do people shop in discrete line breaks? No. Okay. It's a you know, fuzzy edge there. Okay. And if you look at the, overlapping rings, you could bisect the overlap and say, well, that half is cannibalization of the store, and so on. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Bisect that intersection. Anyway, so we would use those types of things. What genetic algorithm? What will survive? Will the sister stores in the area survive? Okay, you know, and so on. So that predictive side, we had to run the analog side, and don't forget, we'd already trained them in the car about what makes a good location. We already did the market planning maps, and everybody agreed this is where we are, where we're not, where we should be. Okay, so everybody's on the same page on the plan, a strategic direction, the strategic market plan. Everybody's on the same page in terms of what makes good dirt and what makes good demos. Okay. And on that side of the pyramid, okay, going up to the analog prediction, okay, in the case of Wendy's, okay, we would present, four analog sites. They did not have to be in the same DNA. Okay. In other words, I could say, well, this South Lake location for the Wendy's is just like the Naperville location in Chicago.
Hmm.
Okay. It's got the same demographics, and everybody go, yeah, yeah, that's South Lake and Naperville. That's the same demos. Okay. And you compare the site scores, same dirt, same demos. Okay. And those stores are doing, on average 1.4. Okay. And then the black box, which had serious horsepower in it, like stuff that you couldn't even explain to them if you wanted to. Okay. And no, you don't want to. You just
Yeah.
say, look, it's magic. It happens over this side. Okay.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, they would come up to within a nano hair of each other. Okay. Up at the top. And everybody said, yep, I absolutely agree. Those four analogs are just like this proposed location, and I agree with that sales forecast number. And lo and behold, the black box wizard in the corner came up with the same number. Boom! Let's go.
So it's same dirt, same demos, same damn black box. You got all your alliteration and your D's in there.
Right.
The other thing that's standing out to me here is what you said about looking at it as a consumer would look at it with this qualitative survey. You're not Your mom doesn't measure the signage square feet You know, that's not how your mom thinks about it. And you
No,
taught them to look at it like a
no.
consumer. And it's
As a
wild to me
consumer,
that it became more predictive because of that.
and that's because of the MBA in marketing and finance and organizational behavior and stuff like that. But being in the being the marketing research, a single person marketing research department at Boston Market, and designing surveys and such. Okay, being in the marketing, one of many in a very strong marketing research department at McDonald's. Okay, um, it's that thinking like a consumer, um, that really made all the difference in the world, and then people could attach to it. Okay,
Yeah.
it diffused things, and it honestly kicked the prediction through the roof.
So you learn about these practical things from art, and then you get the analytics side at Taco, Boston Market, and then McDonald's. Take me through these next couple of years as you go into management consulting and eventually starting Tango.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I thought you were going to throw me fastballs. So it was a softball. um, when I was at Taco Bell, I had a young family at the time, 89, 90. And I was at Taco Bell, Taco Bell 3 times a week. And we would go on site rides and we'd stop at the competitors and taste their new product. So we'd get out, buy whatever the heck, and only take 2 bites, put down your weapons, throw it away. And okay. And so we drive it. I ate Taco Bell 3 times a week. Boston Market, I ate Boston Market 3 times a week. McDonald's, there was one right upstairs at the campus office building in Oak Brook 3 times a week. And I was 273 pounds. I said either I need to go to work for Bally's and get 3 workouts a week, or I got to get out of this thing. And I literally was just putting the final period on my. And by the way, what prompted this is I had been mentioned by Ed Renzi, the CEO of McDonald's at the time, in a shareholder call. My work was referenced in terms of it was called Market Plan Light. It was a long story, but it was a fast tracking of market planning analytics so that you could get it out to the masses, because we were doing in-store surveys. You could only do 5 markets a year, $2 million budget for in-store survey. So anyway, I was referenced by the CEO, and then it was like, I mean, that idea was the fart of the day. The next day, I had taken map info and Voronoi tessellations and interpolated SIC weighted SIC code business data and zip plus 4 weighted point data. It interpolated a heat map in map info, so it looked like a weather map, like no boundaries, no jagged zip codes or polygons, just like a beautiful weather map. I tested it out in Jacksonville, and then flew out to Jacksonville and was like, damn, this shit works. I tweaked it a little bit. And it was like, I mean, and I came, I'm like, hey, I got this.
When you say SIC codes, are you just mapping the density of business types? Is that what we're talking about here?
What business types? And they each get a weight. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So, is it office? Is it industrial? Okay. And so on. So, I would weight each, this is like grunting through on a compact laptop, with the 37,000 row Excel limitation at the time. And, I came up with this new idea, and I was literally told, whoa, cowboy, we're still digesting your last idea. Yeah, this is at McDonald's, and it's like, I got to get out of here. I just, and so I was, Deloitte had a job opening in a newspaper that I was writing a resume tailored for senior manager in their brand new mid-market. They had just spun out Deloitte Consulting, and the accounting firm side was able to have a mid-market management solutions and services. They couldn't call it consulting. Okay, but it was a consulting practice. And there was a real estate opening for a senior manager, one step from partner here in Chicago. And I literally put the period on my resume and the phone rang. And it was one of my buddies from Kellogg. And he's like, hey, you're going to get a call from a headhunter about a Deloitte job. And so I ended up going to work for Deloitte in management consulting here in 97 in Chicago and working for their in their real estate operations and systems consulting practice. So I got into consulting, and then I grew a little frustrated because by that point, Tangram, Rich Baker, was selling my models, the profound impact that I had on that sales forecasting modeling approach. He was selling for $1 million a piece to Blockbuster and Toys R Us. And I'm sitting here bored out of my skull at Deloitte. And by this point, it was like 99. And he said, well, why don't you come down and be, president of Tangram? So I moved the family down there that was no small feat, mind you, uprooted from Naperville and moved down to Dallas, Fort Worth area. And we closed on our house within a couple of weeks, and I got an effective immediately. Your salary is cut in half after So this is 1999, Y2K, management consulting. Okay. I called my boss and said, hey, can I have my job back? And he's like, when you're moving back to Chicago? I said, no, I'm in Dallas. Can you call, the office managing partner? I got it in. He asked me, it was bada bing, bada boom, smooth. I made a raise out of the deal. And I told him, I said, at the time I was going to start building it's never been done before, retail real estate IT consulting practice. And that was, when it really started in 2009, and Wendy's was 2001. My team and I actually watched 9/11 happen from the Wendy's office, believe it or not. We had a meeting at the marketing department and what TV we saw. But yeah, 2099, and by 2001, that's really when the alpha prototype of what Tango became turned out, because we were taking the geodemographic side and the site scoring and the demographic scoring. We built an integration to I streamlined and cut the fat out of their Lotus Notes document management application. We used Explicite for construction. So it's like chewing gum, popsicle sticks, rubber bands. Okay. Integrated with PeopleSoft for their construction project accounting. Okay. And, that was actually the very first proof of concept for reducing they opened, all their stores opened on average, like 60 to 120 days earlier than before, on average 5 to 10% better performing, and on average 5 to 10% less impact and cannibalization.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, it was amazing. And they were
the 2 months faster is like that's the whammer.
That's straight speed to value. That's where that's where ultimately at Tango, that's where getting the hard cases and having so many clients that were private equity investors in these retailers and restaurant companies, they saw the speed to value. Okay. Get in and make it efficient and speed to value. And then it really, surprised me when I looked back at all the projects that I had and realized how many of them were just absolutely driven. The guys who wrote the checks to me were the ones, from private equity and absolutely achieved the value. They either took it private, 7-Eleven Japan saw my, when I built the sales forecasting models for 7-Eleven, the gas, tobacco, alcohol, another hard case, separating those out, forecasting individually or something. And then this reducing the cycle time using that same methodology, getting from 71 stores a year to over 300 stores a year. As soon as the 7-Eleven franchisee in Japan saw that, they immediately took 7-Eleven private.
Why is that?
because they wanted to make the money themselves.
Yeah. They
Well,
didn't want anybody to get that cut.
yeah. Okay. So it's either go public, take private. Okay. You know, speed to value, flip it. Okay. Or in the case of Payless shoes, strip it and dump it. You know,
Yeah.
my models were actually used to build an efficient disposal, efficient, effective way to dispose and maintain. You know, you transfer, you close one, you transfer. Okay. So modeling that transfer, that's key. Okay. You close that one, same thing. Okay. Well, then maybe later on, you might want to, okay, what happens if we close this one? Do we get transfer over like that? And so that's how they use the model. I mean, private equity has any number of different motivations in terms of getting the value that they want
Yeah.
out of a portfolio company.
When you think about Tango, so eventually you go to start Tango, and it's built on all the methodology that we already talked about, but you built your own software. You weren't kind of sticking together with sticks and gum. What do you think was so special about it that you grew so massively, so quickly, and then you exited in relatively speedy time to private equity? What if you could narrow down on the things, what was it?
I had tremendous rock stars. I had the Avengers team of talent, 4 PhDs, and just amazing engineers. Okay, amazing. And so we made a decision, again, out of desperation. We're dying here. Okay, this business model doesn't work. We are the smartest guy. We wouldn't have branched out on our own from Bearing Point. Bearing Point was going under, and about a year from going under at the time. And we left. And we wouldn't start the business if we hadn't proven our business model. And PwC, unfortunately, was dead last. It was about to be bought by IBM. And so we started Tango. But by 2010 now, we had survived. We made it through. But I said, that's it. We're building our own platform. Okay. And it was the right thing to do. I did three things in '09. I brought on the Tririga practice. It cost me $750,000. I brought the predictive analytics practice. It cost me $750,000. And I built software for Oracle called SiteHub, which is the master data management solution, which they still market. And I implemented it at Costco, McDonald's, and Wendy's. But master data management, mastering your data and location data. There had been no master data management for location data, which is pivotal to what we do. And I tell people, I didn't make my numbers by $750,000 that year in '09, and one of them is to blame, but not really, because honestly, if I hadn't made those three bold moves, we wouldn't be having this discussion today. I mean, it was counterintuitive and a huge risk, but it absolutely changed the course and direction, speed and agility, and foresight and initiative, as Art said.
I think I understand this. Tell me if this is right. So you have these other analytics company at this point, and those analytics companies are built by GIS folks and analytics folks, and they don't necessarily have this piece of the construction side but you came out of a management practice where you were dealing with the whole thing all the way through analytics, all the way in through construction. So you got to see the construction software. Your whole shtick was the practical piece of how quickly can we build this and then build out a market. And so your viewpoint is you can't have the analytics without the construction piece too.
Well, it's the full, you're right. It's the full, and the construction was the center point that kind of gives the story, the street cred. Construction is very dirty, grimy, greasy street cred kind of stuff. And that was key. Again, growing up in a development environment, but seeing the sales and marketing side, I lived in an apartment complex that we had built, and I was a leasing agent and property manager while I was working for the company, building shopping centers and selling houses on the weekends. Okay,
Hmm.
so I knew the facilities and maintenance and lease
Yes.
management.
Yes.
Okay, everything just from the very beginning. And Michael Porter, the famous strategy professor from Harvard, um, seminal book, Competitive Strategy, just really brilliant stuff. Uh, he talks about creating value chains. Okay, and it was that management consulting piece. Okay, coming from the heritage of having been there and done that myself. Okay, and having been on the client side at Boston Market and McDonald's. Okay, and then having been a management consultant. Okay, and then having the predictive analytics, the highest of high end predictive analytics. Okay, and GIS platform. Okay, an efficient process based on management consulting. Okay, I'm concerned about the friction that
Hmm.
exists in the system. Okay, so the predictive analytics. Okay, there are a lot of companies that did that. Okay, there are a bunch of companies that did management consult. Okay, and there are a bunch of companies that did the store lifecycle management, construction and lease accounting and what have you. Okay, but taking I don't have three hands, but taking the two and putting a third ring for management consulting in the middle, that's a value chain. You've created a competitive advantage in Michael Porter's terms. It's sustainable and it's unassailable. Okay, because you can't do predictive analytics. Okay, you predictive analytics can't do any of this construction and lease stuff, and neither one of you can implement as a management consultant a solution that serves a client's needs, purpose built.
Yeah. 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 That's fascinating. Um, what I think you may have hit on this a little bit, but 90% of your retailers you work with were private equity backed. How was working differently for a PE backed retailer? What was different about that experience than a privately owned?
Well, I will tell you that probably the best example of that is that example I gave you about McDonald's, where literally when I got mentioned, and it was quite an honor to be mentioned by the CEO of McDonald's, for the work I was doing in my little geeky department and stuff. Um, but that was if I may, the fart of the day back then. And I come up with this new heat map, wildly out there, never been done before, interpolated heat map across businesses and point, Z+4 demographic, psychographic point data, and an interpolated heat map. That was like I was like so excited. Okay, and him like going, "Whoa, cowboy, slow down." Now, it, you know, in the end, at at Tango, that's exactly why they sought me out.
Hmm.
Bain would call, and the one time in particular said, "You have 2 weeks and $100,000 to tell us what we should pay or if we should pay for Big Lots." And I'm like, "Well, okay, what do you got to work with?" And they go, "Well, we got locations and a sales volume." I go, "That's it?" They go, "Yeah, yeah." Okay. Okay. So I spun my guys around. And I had genius guys, man. I could go in there and, I knew enough to be dangerous at every one of these levels and to say, I know you could do this. I know there's a way to do it. And GIS. Anyway, I had them reverse engineer uh, Big Lots market planning. Okay. What they were looking for in the locations, what cannibalization they might have. I think I had open dates. So what cannibalization they might have experienced, against, and then I took a leap forward and built a forward-looking projected expansion plan down to real estate costs, construction costs, labor costs, utility costs, sales forecasts, cannibalization, and return on invested capital. Okay. And I went back to him and I said, take a pass. And they ditched the Big Lots deal, which, as we know now, is sage advice, right? I mean,
Yeah.
but I kept them out of trouble. That the first time was our town in Houston, and another great story was that one where it's like, look, guys, you should probably walk away from this one, and they did.
I've heard that great site selection is more about missing the blunders than it is about hitting
Yeah,
the home runs.
that's exactly correct, and that's the way that's the way Rich Spenker and I at Tangram at the time. It may cost you $1 million for our model, but we're worth it because the cost of one bad site
Yeah.
is $1 million,
Yeah.
and that's true. That's true. It got
And this is
over the years.
of interest to me because I'm in geodemographics and psychographics. But you mentioned to me an interesting way that you would use geodemographic segmentation. I believe is Mosaic at Tango, and it related to something about the time that segments will be willing to actually visit. Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
So Mosaic, I did it. Mosaic was more international. Okay. But at Tango, we used the Claritas segment system, okay, at the time. And we got 84,000 records, I think the day before Christmas in '09. And by the time New Year's Eve rolled around, we had generated 3,200 distance decay functions across the segments, and then how they interrelate. Like, would this person travel how far for Fashion Bug, and would this person travel how far for Catherine's?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and if the deal is you want to try and convert, like optimize where you could those footprints and make 2-in-1s, okay, because they hit the same market, just different price points. Okay. That was those distance decay functions. And then we built that into the predictive analytics.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So you understand by segment, and I think it was like 68 segments at the time when you built it. You understand by segment the attractiveness for any unique consumer type. So it used to be people would look at attractiveness as a singular variable, but you looked at it as multivariate because it depends on who's in the trade area. But then every new trade area you would go to, you would have a new sort of input for that attractiveness variable because you have the households by each segment.
Right. And yes, that's exactly correct. But one of the projects I help Starbucks with is drive-through, their loyalty card, conquering China. Okay. And in that case, coming up with a new trade area algorithm that literally took impedances, times of day, occasions of use, line segments, and utility valued people, different point segments, characteristics, and their inclinations to like one over the other in that particular situation.
Now, when you did that, when you looked at the utility value of time, does it depend on the trade area or depend on the people, or is there a singular like dimension that you're looking at as utility value time?
Well, it's all the above, okay? Because the trade area could be I'm at work and I'm
Yes.
shopping.
Okay.
Okay, the trade area could be I'm at home. The trade area could be I'm out playing at my kid's baseball game. Okay, I did a presentation a long time ago on a research paper, Darwin's Laws of Natural Selection applied to retail real estate, and the smarter, more agile, faster moving predators surround the slower moving. So think of the malls as a slower moving monoliths, and the Kohl's and the Targets and the Walmarts and the Gaps and Old Navies and and everything. And Billy's got his game over here, Janie's got her game over there, and there's an Old Navy in the middle, and we don't go to the mall anymore and buy jeans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, it could be. I mean, it depends on the case, and that occasion of use is another one that I learned from Rich at Tango, because that qualitative psych questionnaire, when you're asking about you know uh, entertainment value, restaurant score, office score. Okay, you're teasing out the building blocks to build occasion of use analytics on top of that, if you understand.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give a VP of real estate today or a head of site selection for a fast growing retail brand? I mean, the landscape has changed a little bit since you were in the game. What would you say today?
So what I would say to, you know, to someone in charge of real estate is, first of all, understand where your company is in terms of where they're moving from an enterprise knowledge of their customer, okay, and the IT direction, and then figure out how to place yourself in the middle of that oncoming traffic and get your project hit by a bus, okay, because you know uh, the way these things are acquired and approved. I think there's a lot of legacy systems, SaaS systems, that are ultimately going to be replaced. Okay, I got called in as a management consultant to replace existing stale old systems.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the definition of the job. Okay, then I built a platform at Tango that was the Uber system. Now that's a 15-year-old code base with a bunch of bolt-on acquisitions that create spaghetti code. And the basic CIO question of, can't we do this better and cheaper with AI? And the answer is yes.
Hmm.
Okay. So another story is when I was at Target, I had a room full of, the market research people, the real estate people, the IT people, the finance people, the marketing people, the merchandising people, all in the same room. And, I was doing some probing around as a management consultant. And I said, can I ask you a question? How many sales forecasting models do you have across finance and merchandising and real estate? Do you have with different understandings of who the customer is and how they behave and what and are they built on the same? Did they come up with the same answer? And the IT guy goes 8, and no, they don't come up with the same answer. Okay, that is the existential opportunity,
Hmm.
if you will. Okay, and I've always been a proponent of enterprise-wide GIS. Get the same understanding, and this goes to your wheelhouse here. Your same understanding of who the customer is, how they behave. Okay, so everybody's working off the same page.
This has been so enjoyable, Jack, and I feel like you are such a unique character that I don't feel like I've not seen a profile of you, because you combine this deep like business understanding of how things get done, like the practical stuff. This thing needs to get built. The other piece that you have is that you are analytically capable. Like, we've got into some pretty deep conversation here about this. And then the third thing that you have, and it's these three things together that I don't know if I've ever seen, is that you have the understanding that there's this social friction and you have the ability to actually push it through. And that's where that 18-point questionnaire came, because you got everybody in a van. And for me, that is massively inspiring. And if I didn't understand why Tango Analytics was successful before, just understanding your personality and your story has really brought some light to it. So, Jack, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
I really appreciate it. And by the way, your stuff is really cool.
I appreciate it, Jack.
Thanks, man.